Well, thank you very much. Such a wonderful, wonderful evening, meeting all of you, and I'm thrilled to be here. And every time that I am invited to talk, I stop and think of how many years have gone by since I started my new life, and how lucky I was that I was lucky enough to be on Schindler's List. Because if it was not for Oskar Schindler, I wouldn't be here. I survived with my mother. It's Oskar Schindler who gave us life. I got married, I have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. And those of us under the care of Oskar Schindler did not suffer as much as the rest, because he looked out for us. And Oskar Schindler is like the shining star, the one person who stood alone and among all the darkness, the hate, the murder, where he looked and he said, I can't stand it. I have to do something. The whole world stood by in silence. The judges, the doctors, the church. Everybody said, well, there's nothing I can do. But Oskar Schindler said, there is something I can do. And this is one of my messages for the students that I am in touch with almost every day. There is never say, I can't do it, because there is always something you can do. When I was a little girl, I was born in Krakow, and I am an only child, so I lived with my parents in a beautiful apartment building that actually was brand new the same year as I was born. And Krakow is a beautiful city. I don't know how many of you have been to Poland and been to Krakow, but Krakow also has not been bombed, because the Germans planned on making it theirs, the government, place for the government. So I had a wonderful life. My grandparents lived around the corner from my house. My parents had great families. My father was one of 8 brothers and a sister. My mother had 4 brothers and 2 sisters. Life was wonderful. Now, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Poland, which was both encouraged by the church and by the government. But, it was something I heard about. And my parents would talk about things when they didn't want me to know. They used to speak Yiddish, because otherwise they talk Polish. My grandparents and my parents and all my friends' parents also were very keen on having us more assimilated than they were. And that's why we were allowed to go to school on Saturday morning, except I was not supposed to write, I remember. And I didn't feel any danger. I just heard about things. I just heard about pogroms. But when you're little, you're too busy with your own life to pay attention. And all this changed on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, and of course they were in Krakow, I think, in about 12 days. And then overnight, from being a little girl, I became an enemy of the state, just because I was Jewish. And immediately, the government started to issue orders against the Jews. Because from the very beginning, their plan was to make Krakow Judenfrei, free of all the Jews. So, of course, the first thing was that children were not allowed to go to school anymore, the Jewish children. Jewish businesses were confiscated. Our bank accounts were frozen. We had a very strict curfew. We were not allowed to own any pets or money or gold or silver and furs or no pets. We had to turn it all to the government. And my father was saying, oh, don't worry, because when the world will hear what's happening, so my friends will hear, and England, they will come and save us. Do you know, there was a first war where my father and his brother were fighting for the freedom of Poland. The Jews lived in Poland for centuries and were very patriotic. My mother's older brother was a surgeon, and he was killed on the battlefield I remember that my grandparents were given a medal posthumously in his memory, and they were very proud of that. Somehow, nobody could imagine that this war would be different. The war is always terrible. The first war was very, very difficult for the people, the people that were not involved as far as fighting. The war was fought between armies. The first war was not fought against the citizens. How could anybody imagine that this would be different, so different? When the orders came that anybody under 12 and anybody over 55 would not be allowed to remain in Krakow, because those people would be sent away to the farms to help the farmer grow food for the German army. And the rest of those with a permit would remain in the old part of Krakow, in the ghetto, and they would have to work in the ghetto, and we would have to leave our homes and move. Well, I was very lucky, because even though I was only 10, by that time I was probably 10 and a half, 11, I was tall for my age. So my parents were able to falsify my birth certificate, made me 2 years older. But I remember when we went and stood in line outside of the offices of the SS to obtain our permits. I remember we stood in this big, big square, and we were surrounded by what seemed to me hundreds of soldiers. And I remember looking at the soldiers and thinking, well, they look normal. They look like ordinary people. They were ordinary people. They were fathers and husbands and brothers and sons. They were doctors and lawyers. How bad can it be? You could not imagine anything so horrible. And here they were, surrounding the people that stood in line to obtain their permit, not only armed with rifles and revolvers, but also with dogs that were trained to attack and tear people apart. And I remember I was standing maybe 12 feet away from one of the soldiers. And here I was, a little girl, still a little girl, even though I was taller than others my age. And he's threatening me, not just with the rifle, but with the dog. He's telling me he's gonna let the dog jump on me and eat me up. And then I remember the trucks came, and more soldiers came, and they started to separate the families. They were, first of all, they separated men from the women, and then they started to take children away, throwing them on a truck. And people were screaming and crying, and the soldiers were shooting. And I remember standing there in that big square, and all around us, the Polish people were occupied. But they were not enslaved. They were about their business. They were going to school, and businesses were open. I remember that day. It was a fall, but it was a beautiful sunny day. And to me, it seemed like the lights went out, and like we were swallowed by darkness. We were given the permits, and we were given 3 weeks to move into our new apartments. This was the old part of the city, and it used to be Podgórze. It was like Cambridge, away, across. I forget, I'm not in Massachusetts. And so that was, you'd cross the bridge, and there was the older part of the city. And it was so old that some of the apartments didn't have bathrooms, but outside in a hall, so whoever lived on the floor had to share it. We were able to take very little things with us because we were not given a whole apartment. We're going to give a space in a room with other people. Depend on the size and on how many windows. If there was one window, 2 families. If there were 2 windows, there would be 4 families. And I remember as my mother and my dad and myself, we packed a few things that we could wear. And my father was able to get a pushcart. We were allowed to take a pushcart. And we put oh my goodness, I remember I put a mattress and a couch. And then we had to take the couch off because there was not enough room for some pots and pans and some dishes and towels and sheets. And my mother, I will never forget, and I regret that we never talked about it. But she made me clean, polish the mail slot at the front